Greetings, friends, and welcome to a heartwarming tale of love, perseverance, and the unexpected bonds that can shape a family. Enjoy the story. Steve's calloused hands gripped the worn steering wheel of his battered old Peterbilt truck as the endless miles of highway stretched out before him. The rumble of the engine and the hum of the tires on the asphalt were the only sounds that accompanied him on this long delivery haul. Letting out a weary sigh, Steve reached into the pocket of his well-worn denim jacket and pulled out his cell phone. Flipping it open, he dialed a familiar number and pressed the phone to his ear. "Karen, I've been on the road so long I'm forgetting what you look like," he said, his deep voice tinged with longing. His wife's warm laughter rang out over the crackly connection. "You'll remember as soon as you get home. How could you forget after 10 years of marriage?" she teased. Steve felt his heart flip in his chest at the sound of her voice. He missed her terribly, the way her soft, delicate fingers would trace patterns on his calloused palms, the gentle curve of her smile, the way she would curl up beside him on the couch, her head resting on his shoulder. "I can't wait to see you, darling," he murmured, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "This delivery haul has felt like an eternity." "I miss you too, Steve," Karen replied, her voice lowering to a soft, intimate tone. "But you said you'd be home for a longer stretch this time, right? With the truck needing repairs and all?" "That's right," Steve confirmed, his grip on the steering wheel loosening slightly. "No more long hauls for a bit. I'll be back for a good while." The two chatted for a while longer, Steve's spirits lifting with every word that fell from his beloved wife's lips. When they finally hung up, he felt a renewed determination to get this job done and get home to the woman he loved. Steve had been supposed to return home to Karen in a week, as they had planned. But then, just as he was preparing to head back, a fortunate extra delivery had come up. And then another driver had needed help, so Steve had taken on those hauls as well, wanting to avoid any late fees and keep the money flowing in. The lucrative jobs would finally allow him and Karen to do the home renovations she had been longing for. New kitchen cabinets, gleaming hardwood floors throughout the house, maybe even that sunroom she had been dreaming about for years. Steve grinned to himself as he imagined the look of pure delight that would spread across Karen's face when he surprised her with it all. 2 years ago, their marriage had nearly fallen apart. Steve still remembered the day vividly, the way his heart had shattered into a million pieces, when Karen had tearfully confessed that she had filed for divorce. She had cried, her delicate features twisted in anguish, saying that she wasn't worthy of him, that he deserved a better woman who could give him the children they had both so desperately wanted. Steve had stormed out of the house, his mind reeling, his chest heaving with the force of his sobs. But he couldn't stay away. When he had returned home, he had found Karen distraught, her eyes red and swollen from endless tears. Pulling her into his strong, comforting embrace, Steve had whispered soothing words of reassurance. "I only want you, Karen. Children or not, you're the only one for me," he had told her, pressing tender kisses to her forehead. Slowly, the divorce papers had been forgotten, and the two had worked to mend the rift that had threatened to tear them apart. The issue of children had become a growing source of difficulty and heartache for Karen in the years after their marriage. She had grown increasingly obsessed with seeing doctor after doctor, each one telling her the same thing, that they were both perfectly healthy and that they just needed to wait a little longer. Steve had watched, his heart breaking, as the light slowly faded from Karen's eyes, the joy and vibrance that had once filled her slowly slipping away. He had thought that she had eventually accepted it, that she had made peace with the fact that they might never have children of their own. But her sudden divorce filing had shown him that she had not. The desire for motherhood had consumed her, leaving her feeling inadequate and unworthy of the love Steve so freely gave. Night after night, Steve would lie awake, listening to the quiet sounds of Karen's muffled sobs from the other room. He longed to comfort her, to take away her pain, but he knew there was little he could do. The decision to have children, or not, was one they would have to make together. The familiar rumble of Steve's truck in the driveway sent a thrill coursing through Karen's veins. She rushed out the front door, the wonderful smells of her home-cooked dinner wafting through the air and making her mouth water. "Steve!" she cried, her face lighting up with pure joy as she flung herself into his waiting arms. Steve held her tight, savoring the feel of her slender body pressed against his, the sweet scent of her hair filling his senses. Over the meal she had meticulously prepared, Steve could see a renewed spark in Karen's eyes, a vibrancy that he hadn't witnessed in far too long. The happiness and re-energized spirit that radiated from her warmed his heart, and he knew in that moment that his long absences had taken a greater toll on her than he had realized. In the days that followed Steve's homecoming, he couldn't help but notice a subtle yet distinct change in Karen's behavior. Where once she had been content to remain at home, tending to the household duties and awaiting his return, she now began going to the bathhouse with increasing frequency, something she had always disliked doing in the past, preferring the privacy and comfort of their own humble abode. Suspicious, Steve's mind began to race with the myriad of possibilities. Had Karen, in his long absences, found the companionship of a lover to fill the void? Or perhaps, he feared, the medical issue she had alluded to was not with her at all, but with him, and she was seeking comfort and intimacy elsewhere as a result. His gut twisted with the agonizing thought, and he felt a growing sense of unease settle over him. Unable to quell the mounting doubts that plagued his mind, Steve resolved that he needed to follow her to the bathhouse, to uncover the truth for himself. Perhaps, he reasoned, there was a perfectly innocent explanation for her newfound visits, but the nagging voice of insecurity refused to be silenced. He had to know, once and for all, what was drawing his beloved wife away from their home with such frequency. As he prepared to embark on his clandestine mission, Steve's heart raced with a mixture of trepidation and determination. The thought of betraying Karen's trust weighed heavily upon him, but his consuming need to understand her actions outweighed his reservations. With a deep, steadying breath, he set out, determined to get to the bottom of this perplexing mystery. As Steve slipped through the ornate doors of the bathhouse, his eyes scanned the lavish interior, searching for any sign of his wife. He made his way through the maze of private treatment rooms, the sounds of relaxed chatter and the sloshing of water echoing all around him. And then he saw her, but not in the way he had expected. Instead of indulging in the luxurious treatments, Karen was carefully tending to a group of young orphans who were too small to bathe themselves. Steve watched, transfixed, as she gently washed the hair of a little blue-eyed girl, murmuring soft words of comfort and affection. The child looked up at Karen with such adoration that Steve felt his heart swell with emotion. It was then that he realized the truth. Karen's frequent trips to the bathhouse were not about infidelity, but about her volunteering at the orphanage housed within. A wave of shame washed over Steve for ever doubting his wife's loyalty and purity of heart. As he turned to leave, not wanting to intrude on this intimate moment, the little girl looked up and called out, "Mama!" Steve froze, his eyes widening. Mama? Had Karen truly found the motherhood she had so desperately craved? That evening, when Steve returned home, Karen could see the conflicting emotions playing across his weathered features. She gently took his calloused hands in her own, her delicate fingers tracing soothing patterns on his skin. "Steve, my darling," she began, her voice soft and tender. "I know you saw me at the bathhouse today, caring for those orphaned children." Steve opened his mouth to speak, to apologize for his doubts, but Karen placed a slender finger against his lips, silencing him. "Let me explain," she continued, and explain she did, pouring out her heart about the volunteer work she had been undertaking at the local orphanage. She spoke of the little girl, Amelia, whom she had grown to love as her own, her infectious laughter, her resilient spirit, the way she would cling to Karen's skirts seeking comfort and affection. Karen's eyes shone with unshed tears as she recounted the stories, her voice thick with emotion. Steve felt a lump form in his throat as he listened, his own eyes glistening. He had always known his wife had a compassionate heart, but to see it on full display, to hear the depth of her care and commitment, it stirred something deep within him. In that moment, any lingering doubts he had harbored were washed away, replaced by a profound admiration and love for the woman standing before him. "Karen, my darling," he murmured, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry I ever doubted you." Karen looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Does this mean—" she asked hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. Steve smiled and pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. "Yes, my love. Let's make it official. Let's adopt that little girl and give her the family she deserves." Karen let out a joyful sob, wrapping her arms around Steve's neck and burying her face against his chest. "Oh, Steve," she cried, her words muffled by the fabric of his shirt. "You've made me the happiest woman in the world." Steve held her close, his heart swelling with love and pride. He had never seen Karen so radiant, so full of life and purpose. This was the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago, and he vowed to do everything in his power to keep that light burning bright. In the weeks that followed, Steve found himself rushing home from his halls, his heart overflowing with excitement. 2 loving hearts awaited him now, Karen's and the bright-eyed little girl they had welcomed into their family. Steve had accepted the child as his own from the moment he had seen the tender bond between her and his wife. He marveled at the way she had so effortlessly wormed her way into their lives, filling a void they hadn't even realized was there. As he pulled into the driveway, he could see Karen and the little girl playing in the yard, their joyful laughter ringing out in the warm summer air. Steve hurried to join them, his weathered features breaking into a wide grin as he scooped the child into his arms and twirled her around, eliciting squeals of delight. This was his family now, the woman he loved more than life itself, and the precious child they had embraced with open hearts. Steve had never felt more complete, more whole, than in this moment. The long, lonely halls were a small price to pay for the happiness that now filled his life. Karen watched, her eyes shining with tears of joy, as Steve showered the little girl with affection. She knew in that instant that their family was finally, truly complete.